Welcome to Mission Majjhima. Ajahn. So Ajahn, tell us about Majjhima Nikaya 36, the Mahasaccaka Sutta.
Okay, so in this sutta, we find Saccaka. This is the second discourse in a row where Saccaka comes and talks to the Buddha. In this one, he comes alone, whereas the last sutta, he came with a big group of people. And Ananda tells the Buddha that he's coming and says that Saccaka is hoping to discredit the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Saccaka launches into what he wants to talk about, which is development of body and development of mind. So this sutta is really about what is true strength training. Saccaka, the Buddha, asks him, what do you mean by development, kaya bhavana and chitta bhavana? And Saccaka says, by kaya bhavana, development of the body, bodily strength, it refers to bodily endurance, basically ascetic practices, which were big amongst the Jains and many of the wanderers at that time, being able to reject social conventions and to fast and to basically be very austere. And then the Buddha asks Saccaka, do those wanderers who are fasting, do they eventually go back and eat, a bunch of delicious food? And Saccaka's like, oh yeah, they do. They go back and eat and then they get overweight. And then the Buddha says, well, actually, you don't know bodily development, so how could you know mental development? Then he talks about his own path to awakening. And at this point, I'd like to go more into a very useful resource on Sutta Central, their map function. So we'll go over there now. Here we have Sutta Central's map feature, which is great. You just go to suttacentral.net/map. Here's India at the time of the Buddha with the Janapada, these different great kingdoms. And most of the Buddha's discourses take place here in the Ganges River Valley. He was born up here. In the Sakya country, that's where the Buddha was born, in Lumbini, and then growing up in these palaces, and then deciding to go forth. And the cool thing about this map is that you can really click on anything and then get a link to the dictionary of Pali proper names, and then get this great description of these different places, and zoom in and out and find out about these different places. So after going forth, he moves down here to the Vajji country and meets Alara Kalama in Vaisali, which is also where this discourse takes place. And after studying in Vaisali, he moves with Alara Kalama. He goes down to Rajagaha and studies with Uddaka Ramaputta. And after studying with him, moves down here to Uruvela, to the Bodh Gaya, to the area around what is now Bodh Gaya. And this is just to show the map feature. Okay, so a really neat resource, and we meet with the Buddha as he's at Uruvela, and he's gone forth and studied with these two teachers, and he says he comes to Uruvela and he sits by the bank of the Narendra River and has this spontaneous similes. 3 similes come to mind of 3 sticks for starting fires. One of them is a wet, waterlogged stick in the water, and he thinks, could someone come and start a fire with this wet, waterlogged stick in the water? No. Even if one were to exert energy, wouldn't be able to create a spark. Next simile is a wet stick that's far from water, and could someone start a fire with that? No, because it's waterlogged. And then the third simile is a dry stick far from water, and someone could start a fire with that. And similarly, this has to do with being separated externally from sensual pleasures, withdrawn from the world to some extent. That's not being in the water versus being apart from the water. And then the internal, the sogginess of the stick has to do with one's internal grasping at sensual pleasures. And the Buddha says that to start a fire, i.e. to have the flame of enlightenment arise, you need to be both bodily withdrawn and to have this mental withdrawal as well from sensual pleasures. So after those similes, he does, in this sutta, keep exerting and doing a bit of bodily austerity. And at some point, after going to an extreme, he realizes, I've gone as far as anybody can go with these austerities, but I haven't attained enlightenment. So how about is there another way? And he remembers back when he was a kid, just sitting under the tree, when he was a child, and he enters the first jhana, and then the Buddha or Bodhisatta reflects, is there anything wrong with this? Is this possibly the path to enlightenment? And he realizes that yes, it is the path to enlightenment. Why am I afraid of this sukha, this pleasure, which is blameless? And so he pursues that path, attains the first, second, third, fourth jhana, and then on the night of his awakening, sees his past rebirths, sees how being similarly fare on according to their karma, and then achieves enlightenment, tells this to Saccaka. Saccaka basically hasn't been paying attention, says, oh, but do you sleep during the day? And the Buddha says, yeah, like in the hot season, I'll lie down very mindfully sometimes for a bit of time. And after that, Saccaka is pleased with this. And the Buddha says sometimes people think that when I'm giving a talk, I'm only talking to them, but they shouldn't think that. I'm just speaking the Dhamma. Saccaka comes back and says, it's impressive, Buddha, that even after I speak to you in this impudent and insulting way, your facial expression gets even brighter. So he's inspired. Ajahn, what would you like to draw out of this sutta?
I think, there's a lot, but I think the first thing, because I think it's so significant, is what you pointed to at that moment where the Buddha's recounting his movement from asceticism to the path of cultivating jhana. And the fact that he's been pushing himself, and the texts say his path to enlightenment lasted about 7 years. He's been pushing himself on these ascetic practices to the brink of kind of death, actually. And then this moment arises, this memory just of him sitting under a tree, a rose apple tree as a child, feeling safe, kind of happy, and slipping into the first jhana just seamlessly. And this moment I think of it as really a moment of grace, just like, oh, actually it's not as complicated and horrible as I'm making it out to be. Like it's here. And that's such a sweet way of, not that the jhanas are easy to attain or anything like that, but that motion of the heart towards, this path is one of letting go. And somehow that touches that for me. And then the knowledge which you spoke of, that insight, is this the path to awakening? It is. And in that phrase, the personal pronoun is left out. It's not, and I answered myself. It is the path. It's just the answer arose. It is the path. And so often the deepest insights, I feel, well up from us in this kind of impersonal way that just it's right there. So I find that just a beautiful moment. And then his humility, he's been pushing himself along with these other ascetics. You have that kind of machismo back and forth. We've all experienced this. And he's willing to basically endure their looking down on him and dismissing him. His pride is what gives up. And you hear it where, like, as far as another ascetic has pushed himself, I have pushed myself that far. And he gives that all up, all that pride, and just takes porridge. And the other ascetics are like, eating porridge. What luxury. But there's a lot to flesh out, but that moment is really important in the suttas, because otherwise we can get so caught in this narrative of pushing and a very unwholesome way of conceiving the path. And that moment, that's the key to his awakening, is so different than that flavor.
I think in a similar vein, it's interesting that we find 3 similes and not 4. So we've got a wet stick in the water, we've got a wet stick on land, and we've got a dry stick on land. But we don't find a dry stick in the water, because that just doesn't make sense. But that's what a lot of Americans, that was what we want for our spirituality, is like we're internally ready and then still immersed in sensuality. But it's just interesting that the Buddha doesn't even go there. John, what else would you like to draw out?
Just quickly, maybe the fact that with development in body and development in mind, I know we didn't speak about that in too much detail, but it's a little unclear. The commentaries say development of body is insight, and so shields you from painful feeling because you can see, or pleasant feeling because you can see this is impermanent. Whereas development in mind is samadhi, because when the body's in pain, you can retreat from it into a state of jhana. But other places in the suttas say development of body is sila, ethics and virtue, where development of mind is samadhi. And I think that's just an interesting way of looking at it. Like if we're keeping good sila, perhaps we're keeping ourselves as the dry stick, away from a lot of the water and not grasping at the signs and, secondary characteristics of a pleasant sight, and so can kind of shield the mind from that. But then jhana and deep concentration allow us to go kind of shield the mind from pain. What's the word of the week, Ajahn?
The word of the week is Bodhisatta, which is the Pali for Bodhisattva. This is the Satta, the being who is, or Sattva in Sanskrit, who's searching for enlightenment, the enlightenment being. So this is what the Buddha in the Pali Canon is referred to before he attains enlightenment. And this concept of a bodhisattva in Mahayana Buddhism is really expanded to mean anyone or all practitioners who are pre-Buddhahood, and that's a whole path, a whole vehicle in the Mahayana, whereas it's just the Buddha, framed as just the Buddha in the Pali Canon.
Well, we'll see you all in a few minutes for Zoom, or next week for Majjhima Nikaya 37. Ajahn.